Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to Dialogue. I'm Taimur Shamil. Prime Minister Imran Khan would be addressing the United Nations General Assembly today, and roughly around 9:30, 9:45. Prime Minister Imran Khan would raise several points in his speech, but he would specially mention Jammu and Kashmir, the illegally Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, and the atrocities that are being committed by the Indian forces over there in Indian Kashmir, Indian occupied Kashmir. We'll be also discussing about the way Prime Minister Imran Khan exposed RSS, Shiv Sena and BJP. We remember last year in 2019, Prime Minister Imran Khan specially mentioned the nexus between RSS, Shiv Sena and BJP. And probably this was the first time that a Pakistani Prime Minister actually named these three organizations and exposed them and their nexus and the way they are killing innocent people, Kashmiri especially in Indian occupied Kashmir, the way they have been propagating their own idea, Hindutva nationalism for that matter. We'll be discussing about this and the way India has become a threat to the regional peace, most importantly. Pakistan stands for peace and stability. Pakistan opened the Kartarpur corridor with India. The gesture was very simple, that Pakistan wants peace and stability in the region. And at one point, Pakistan was expecting that India would reciprocate. But as we can see very evidently that India hasn't reciprocated, rather they have stepped up their aggression on line of control, they have stepped up their attacks on innocent Kashmiri people, they have been attacking ambulances, hospitals, schools, they have been attacking children and women for that matter, elderly people in Indian occupied Kashmir. Pakistan's stance is very clear. Pakistan stands for peace, but only if India would reciprocate that. We'll be discussing about Prime Minister Imran Khan's speech at United Nations General Assembly, and one more very important point that we'll be discussing today in our show, and that is that the Pakistan Hindu Council and the chairperson of Pakistan Hindu Council, Dr. Ramesh Kumar Vankwani, he is member of the National Assembly. Today they are giving a sit-in in Islamabad. Tomorrow there would be a sit-in in front of the Indian High Commission. That is primarily to protest against the killing and the death of 11 members of a Pakistani Hindu community who went to India a few years back, and under mysterious circumstances in Jodhpur, India, they were found dead. They demand that there should be an inquiry into the matter, and the Hindu community of Pakistan, Pakistan Hindu Council, wants to know what happened to those Pakistanis. We all think that perhaps when we talk about India, India is safe for the Hindu community maybe, if not for the Muslims or for the Christians, for Dalits for that matter, but it seems that India is not safe even for the Hindu community itself, and especially when the Pakistani Hindus went there to India. We'll be discussing about this in our show today. We are joined by a special guest in the studios. Our first guest is Dr. Ibrahim Malik from Institute of Strategic Studies, Islamabad. He is the Director of India Study Center. Welcome to the show, Dr. Malik. We are also joined by Dr. Vikas Ali Kausar, renowned academic from National University of Modern Languages. Welcome to the show, Mr. Kausar. We are joined by Mia Abrar, renowned senior journalist and expert on Pakistan's foreign policy. Welcome to the show, Mr. Abrar. Dr. Malik, starting with Prime Minister's speech at UNGA, Pakistan and UNGA, United Nations General Assembly. Last year and this year, how do you see the upcoming speech of Prime Minister Imran Khan? What do you anticipate?
In fact, if we look at the last year's speech and what all happenings have taken place in this time period, which is almost a year is over, then most focus is what all has been done about the Kashmiris in Indian occupied and how their sufferings have happened, whether it's a human rights violation, whether it's on account of health infrastructure, whether and all other things, especially looking at their socio-economic stature.
Right.
Then introduction of the new domicile law.
Right.
And their efforts for endangering peace and stability in South Asia. This is very important because the blatant unilateralism of India in Indian occupied Kashmir is the biggest threat to peace and security in this region. So, Prime Minister Imran Khan is going to sensitize the world. This is the time, if India is not halted from its hegemonic design and its unilateralism in Kashmir, then certainly the peace in the region in particular and peace in the world in large will remain in danger, especially once two nations are nuclear nations, and any miscalculation may endanger the peace and stability of the whole world. So this is the point of sensitivity which Prime Minister is going to highlight in today's address.
Right. Dr. Kaushal, last year Prime Minister Imran Khan exposed RSS, Shiv Sena and BJP, their nexus. That was probably the first time that a Pakistani Prime Minister was actually exposing these three organizations internationally at United Nations General Assembly. How important is exposing these three organizations? I want you to tell to our audience in Asia and internationally, how important is this point?
Thank you for the question. And see, fundamentally two things. I mean, this UNGA speech of a Pakistani Prime Minister has become very much important from the last year, because people have attached a lot of hopes from Prime Minister Imran Khan, particularly when the incident of the abrogation of the article and that illegal bifurcation of the state happened in the last year. And then we saw a very long, detailed and very, I must say, very direct speech by Prime Minister Imran Khan about the rights of the Kashmiri people, the situation and the overall lockdown that things were happening. Kashmiris particularly have attached deeper hopes with that speech, and it was hailed across that for the first time very expressive. Somebody expressed their wishes and aspiration and tried to communicate to the international world as well. On the other side, of course, there was the situation in India, particularly when we see the acts like CAA and other bills, and then the minority issues. I mean, these are now world open international organizations are writing, they're civil society organizations across the globe. I mean, there is a lot of resentment, and BJP particularly is under tremendous pressure internationally, globally as well. The overall picture, when they call the secular India, I mean, that has been badly tarnished. I mean, there are dozens and hundreds of incidents, and I don't think so it needs further elaboration, because it's very much self-evident the way, the trajectory they operate. The fundamental question we need to see, this time again people have lots of hopes, but I want to just, before answering that question, I want to just delve into one point, that the overall framework of United Nations, when Prime Minister spoke, we also need to see that how effective it has been now, particularly when it comes to Kashmir and the institutions like United Nations, when we are living in a global democratic order, to what extent they have been able to fulfill our, we can say, understand the plight of the people, innocent people like the people of Jammu and Kashmir. Particularly, this is a long pending dispute over there. I mean, in past we have also seen that. It's a very sad. I mean, I was just listening towards the speech of one of the sideline events of the Indian Prime Minister, who was saying that UN needs to be very much effective on climate change and poverty and all that. But the fundamental question is, United Nations Human Rights Council have issued 2 reports in, I guess, 16 or 17, some back-to-back reports on the situation in Kashmir, and recommending the Indian government, particularly this BJP government also, that they should take certain actions against the gross human rights violation over there, but it didn't happen. So the question is, the nations like the Prime Minister, the government of BJP particularly, they themselves undermine the legitimacy of international organizations and institutions. This results in disappointment. This results in the distrust in the international global framework. The international community, international leaders, particularly when they say they have the shared goals, shared destination, when they say they share the SDGs, they share many other concerns, they should understand one important thing, that if the people, those who are victims, if the people, those who are innocent, and people, those who are standing for their rights, particularly fundamental political rights like the people of Jammu and Kashmir, if they are not addressed, this entire framework won't be very much effective in future as well.
We'll be talking about the very nature of United Nations in a while. But before that, Mr. Ibrahim, talking about, again I would put this question, RSS, Shiv Sena and BJP. Prime Minister last year made an analogy, and that was, he compared these 3 organizations with Nazi forces back in Germany. How do you see this?
Thank you. Look, when we talk about Prime Minister's speech, actually he has set the bar very high. even for himself. And he talked not only about Kashmiris, but all the oppressed people of the world. He talked about the genocide going on of Muslims, Christians, Dalits, not only in India but beyond that. Then when we talk about Prime Minister's address, the audience has been grown manifold, because Prime Minister has talked about Palestine, he has talked about Kashmir, he has talked about oppressed people of the world, then he has been talking about poverty alleviation. So people would be looking not only the oppressed people, but also what he's coming up with, what solutions he has. We have been looking that Prime Minister and Foreign Minister, they have been asking the UN, and nothing has happened. Then we saw that there was some sort of diplomatic onslaught between Pakistan and Saudi Arabia on OIC platform, and Prime Minister's team has been very harsh towards the OIC, and finally the OIC had that Foreign Minister summit.
Rather straightforward towards the OIC,
Yeah.
right.
But diplomatically, I'm talking about. But now, people are looking at the Prime Minister's speech. What is the solution? Because what we have seen, that over the past 1 year, since the Prime Minister spoke very eloquently at the UN about Kashmiri people, so he himself had said that if I am attacked and my family's honor is at the line, I will have no option but to pick the gun. Now, if we see at the UN resolutions, there is a provision that people who are fighting for freedom, they should be given arms, and they have this right to, in an armed conflict, they have this right to
Defend themselves.
So Prime Minister has so many challenges in his speech,
Right.
and he has to answer at least some simmering questions at least. And
Because UNGA is Pakistan's image. Primarily, Prime Minister is representing Pakistan, and at UNGA, every word would be representing Pakistan.
Yeah.
Dr. Malik, talking about the Indian atrocities, talking about Kashmir, the very idea of UN, Pakistan has been bringing up this issue repeatedly, that UN, the international community, has to take notice of what is happening in Indian occupied Kashmir. How important is this point, Kashmir, to be raised up at UN? And by the way, when Kashmir was discussed after, I would say, 3-4 decades at United Nations Security Council for that matter. So how important is bringing up the issue of Kashmir at UNGA?
In fact, this is one of the important, pertinent aspect which asks the question on the standing of UN as well. Because this is the highest forum in the world where such like issues are debated. If this issue is not settled, not addressed at this particular juncture of the history, then again the Committee of Nations question will be raised about the standing of the institution. So it is the issue of the itself, sanctity of the institution, because the resolution which was highlighted there in 1948 and so many other resolutions thereafter, these are yet pending. If these are not addressed at this time, so it will be a big question. And secondly, Pakistan has internationalized this issue in a manner. Now the words of conscience are everywhere. Issues debated in US Congress, issues debated in UK, even issues debated within India. This is one thing. Now, why this issue is important? Because every aspect of Kashmir is linked with its resolution, and most importantly, which I must like to highlight here, this is the high time that UN has to address two important actions at this moment of the history. First of all, they must send a fact-finding mission in Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir. They should look into the issue and highlight the state of affairs and to put it on the for the information of the whole world. One. Secondly, this is the high time that UN must appoint a special envoy on Kashmir as they have on Afghanistan.
And there have been reports, reporters have been reporting that what is happening in
this
Indian
is the
occupied
time.
Kashmir.
If these two actions are not done at this moment, people will raise fingers on even United Nations itself. So it is the obligation for UN, where Pakistan is time and again highlighting the issue in front of the all leaders of the world, that this issue must be addressed at this moment. And the foremost is, let the world should know what is happening inside the Kashmir. And UN fact-finding mission, I think that would be the right forum where this could be highlighted. Secondly, now time has come to depute a special envoy on Kashmir, and it has to be deputed, otherwise things will move in a direction which will not pay dividend to the existing situation.
Dr. Kaushal, how big is the threat of this extremism, Hindutva extremism in India for the region?
I guess from the last 2-3 years, the entire trajectory of BJP politics, when we study closely, we come to know 2-3 things as well. I mean, initially, the Congress politics, when we saw that, it was largely sort of India politics, try to cover up the issues and try to bring in some minorities. Somehow, from post-47, tried to project to the world about secular nature of India, despite having deeper political and other complex issues in the society. But over the period of time, when we see the rise of BJP, it has exposed particularly BJP's politics, which is very much communal in nature. So those fault lines came up more broadly, openly, and which posed a great and deeper challenge to the Indian society. I mean, look at few things. I mean, it's not they say that your domestic policy always have a reflection internationally as well. So the situation with its neighboring countries, of course, with Pakistan, there's a sustained issue of Jammu and Kashmir and other conflicts, but you can see with the China, I mean, it's their trading partner. President Xi visited, Prime Minister Modi has visited China many times, saying lots of things about their relationship. But what is, I mean, right now, what is the situation? Two forces, in front of each other. I personally think we need to understand, of course, this is the reflection of the domestic politics, actually. The politics which is very much exclusive in nature, which believes that certain sort of people should rule, which discriminates on the basis of religion and caste and creed, which is very much detrimental for any society. In a country like India, which is quite populous, and they said they believe, and they also say they champion that diversity. With this diversity, you cannot manage so much exclusive politics. And then when we see one more important thing, I mean, once they introduced laws like the Citizen Amendment Act and others, I mean, it has literally further widened the divisions between communities. I mean, you have seen that people protesting in Shaheen Bagh, the Muslims and other. I mean, what were the slogans and what were the narratives that those who were protesting against their politics, they were called Pakistanis. Now, the fundamental question that we need to understand here is that can it work and can it sustain? The fundamental challenge to the BDP is, what's the problem with this extremist politics or maybe the politics of exclusion is that you cannot sustain it. To sustain, you have to keep that constituency intact. And a country like India, it's bigger and deeper challenge, and the question for their own civil society and center wise is that would you be able to sustain that and for how long? Because at the end of the day, you have a crisis with Nepal, you have issues with Pakistan already since 47, but then you have the broader, deeper issue now with China and the other thing as well.
Right.
So I guess this is, just to conclude one thing, I mean, this is also dangerous for the region, because now there's a bigger question in the international politics about multilateralism, the cooperation and all these things. I mean, at the end of the day, you are deeply connected with the region, you are deeply connected internationally, you have world bodies, all these things. This, of course, impacts the regional politics, regional peace and stability, and that's what UN champions a lot, that these peace, stability, development politics are deeply interrelated.
Mr. Imran, of course, international relations and politics is very important. But if we look at India's case, what would be more important, the regional consensus and the regional understanding that India is becoming a bully in the region, or we see that some of the countries, big countries, especially not in South Asia, but outside of South Asia, they are supporting India. Regionally, we see that India is getting isolated day by day. They don't have a role in Afghanistan, they don't have good relations with China, with Nepal for that matter, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka. So regionally, we see that India is kind of isolated. How do you see this whole situation?
Thank you. But coming back to your question about the United Nations, you know, UN is failing, and Foreign Minister Shah Mahmood Qureshi in his speech to the UNGA, he has mentioned about this. And if we see in the history, you know, when League of Nations failed, what happened? The Second World War broke out. And now the UN is failing in Kashmir. So what will happen? In Palestine, it has already failed. In other conflicts, it has failed as well. So now we are inching towards a nuclear war between three nuclear powers. India has actually taken the lid off the bomb, and this atomic bomb, you know, we are talking about nuclear war. China has moved in. Since India, you know, it's changed the status quo on Kashmir. China has moved in, and now China is increasing the war in China-Indo border, and it is going not only in Ladakh, but also it is on Bhutan border, on Nepal border, it's going on. So what China is doing, China is dragging India into its own territory to drain its resources. China, we know that India is already, you know, doing very bad in economy. So India's resources are draining, and China is making sure that India dies its own death. We already know that there are, you know, sectarian wars, there are communal wars, there are, you know, wars against each other, you know, minorities are being targeted. So India is going towards its annihilation, I fear. Then towards Kashmir, you know, if you see what's happening inside Kashmir, we are saying that, you know, India is suffocating Kashmiris economically, culturally, and socially. You know, not only Kashmiris are being killed, they are being maimed. There is an unannounced embargo on media gags are there. Then they are not even allowing Kashmiris their freedom of speech. You know, UAPA is being harshly used to gag Kashmiri voices on social media. Then economic embargo is there. Then now demographic changes are being taking place. So actually, this is a mass genocide plan India is adopting in Kashmir. But even inside India, India is falling. So I think that if UN doesn't take any immediate action, I fear that UN is going to disintegrate. People would lose hope in, they have already lost hope. But Prime Minister's speech would be very, you know, important tonight.
Right. It's been 73 years now.
Yeah.
And as you just mentioned, that UN or the international community has to take notice of what is happening in Indian-occupied Kashmir. We'll continue our discussion on Pakistan's stance at United Nations General Assembly. Prime Minister Imran Khan would be giving his speech at UNGA shortly around 9:30, 9:45 Pakistan Standard Time, and he'll raise the issue of Kashmir at UNGA once again. Last year he mentioned Kashmir, and probably that was the first time that Pakistani Prime Minister, any Pakistani Prime Minister, exposed RSS, Shiv Sena and BJP and their nexus and the way they are committing atrocities in Indian-occupied Kashmir. We'll be continuing our discussion on that. Stay with us. Welcome back. We are discussing Prime Minister Imran Khan's speech at UNGA. Dr. Malik, how do you see the rise of Hindutva in India, and not just BJP, but the threat that RSS is posing to Pakistan and to other countries as well? It's a big threat for Bangladesh. It's a big threat for Nepal, for that matter. How do you see this rise of extremism and terrorism in India?
Thank you, Tamur, for asking this question. I think this is a very sensitive and important question to understand the trajectories of the domestic politics of India, then having its linkage with the external side as well. Hindutva, RSS and BJP. This is a triangle. We don't go beyond. We just take start from 2014 once Modi was the CM Gujarat. What happened at that time? The killing, massive killing, the way Muslims were marginalized, genocide was going on, and after becoming the Prime Minister, he further multiplied his agenda under the ambit of, under the umbrella of RSS, and RSS has again the ideology which is the Hindutva. Hindutva's ideology is very much known to that, this is inspired by the Nazis' ideology. Violence, intolerance, and ultimately making the environment in a manner that none of the voices, we don't accept its ideology to be sustained inside India for this very purpose.
You mean no Muslims, no Christians, no Sikhs?
No Muslims, no Sikhs, no Christians, even they are not going to afford their
Dalits.
own Dalits, which is the part of the Hindus. What they are looking, Mahabharat, RSS, we say that it has the biggest agenda, which is the Akhand Bharat, which they are looking. That is why they have the external linkages as well, and its manifestation is seen. Issue with Nepal, issue with Bangladesh, issue with China, issue with Sri Lanka, and forget about our own equation with India. So India through RSS, which was ultimately heading towards having an agenda, seeing India as the most hegemonic state in the region and to implement its own policy, not accepting any country which is around us. So this is very, I think, very dangerous game which India is going to do, and India itself is going to be the victim of its own policies. And this is the time. This is the time Pakistan must highlight to UN and other world fora, RSS must be declared as a terrorist organization, because this is the organization which is not going to tolerate any of the minority inside India.
So what about this whole debate of human rights? What about this whole debate of human rights on the international principles? Why this duplicity at the international level?
This is what this dichotomy is there. This is the time, if they have not stopped India from atrocities which they are committing inside India and inside Kashmir, reaction will come. Reaction will come from within India. Reaction will come from within Kashmir, and especially what India is going to do. They have militarized RSS, and they have given a special status, and they are settling them inside Indian occupied Jammu and Kashmir, which will have very negative impact. And you link it with new domicile law as well, changing the demography, domination of the RSS, implementation of the Hindutva ideology, and the things will be very dangerous in the long run.
For the region especially. Dr. Kausar, talking about United Nations, there is a whole debate, as we all know, about the very effectiveness of United Nations. So much so that recently, for the last many years I would say, people have been discussing the very idea of United Nations. Is it democratic? P5 dominate United Nations, we all know that. 4 out of 5 countries, somehow they also support India. So, and they also have a colonial legacy. Many people think that we have to decolonize United Nations itself. Most of these countries, P5 let's say, even democratically, they don't represent much of the world. Even in terms of GDP, they don't represent much of the world, except China, I would say. But rest 4 and their direct linkages with India, how do you see that?
See, that's a very interesting debate and question, and I mean it's very useful in the context that when we see post formation of this UN, I mean of course there has been a lot of transformations in past when we see, I mean there is a one-side debate that there have been a lot of structures created, narratives, ideas that stopped countries fighting and brought together sort of for collaboration and economic development. World saw that also, but ironically, we must see that, I mean, at the end of the United Nations is what? It's the collaboration of the countries. The problem for the period of time we have seen is that the actually descending level of politics. The problem internationally, we have seen that the debate of international politics, which usually initially when we saw was revolved around certain basic principles of humanity, human rights, development. We see the Charter of United Nations, very impressive in all these things. But what
so
happened?
You mean this is realpolitik under the, let's say, garb of this collaboration and all that?
My point is that over the period of time, this politics that is happening in the countries, which is, I mean, right now we have seen in US particularly, I mean, overall the politics, the narrative we have seen in other countries as well. I mean, there is an era we see now of a politics which is not very much, I must say, encouraging indicator for the people, those who believe in the collaboration and the structures. Now, that's a fundamental, I guess, challenge. I mean, see, this has definitely impacted UN performance and its allied agencies as well. I mean, you see, there have been more than 8 or 9, I guess, UNSC resolutions on Yemen. None of it was implemented. It's a recent thing. On Syria, you have seen things didn't work. Now, we have seen the clear division between Russia, China, US over there, debates, interest, and all these things. And I guess this has, I mean, you've seen the SDGs, before SDGs, there was Millennium Development Goals. Were they successful? No. When you talk, when you state that it requires collaboration, you take the globe as something, you know, as a collective shared thing. The problem here in execution is that the politics of the countries particularly and the changing dynamics, it definitely impacts. And Prime Minister today spoke, I guess, in one of the events about the poverty, rising poverty and all these things.
Yes.
I mean, there's a deeper political inequality. There's a deeper economic inequality rising in the world. And this, of course, see, when we talk about Kashmir, particularly one of the major objectives was to resolve the international conflicts and, you know, maintain this peace as well. The fundamental question is, has it been done? Because if it is done in the context of P5, where they want it happen, where they don't want it didn't happen, that's a very challenging thing for United Nations and its agencies as well. So primarily, I guess this is a burning question when it comes to inequalities, when it comes to peace building, when it comes to education and other crises in the world. I guess there have to be unanimous approach. Otherwise, this gap between developing countries and developed countries would expand. And I personally think post-COVID, there's another question that would this multilateralism work? The way we saw the politics within COVID, that's not a very encouraging sign for the people, those who believe in this global liberal order. So the question is, either you have to act on the commitments that you made, may it be on the resolution. I mean, Kashmiris are asking for the fundamental thing which is mentioned in the UN Charter, Freedom Charter. It's not something outside this thing. It's something promised by the UNSCs, not once, many times.
And Palestinians for
Absolutely.
that matter. Mr. Abrar, so for the weak, there is no support internationally. Is that the case?
Yes, definitely. It's a jungle law, you know, and a weaker has no support. But then United Nations should make it clear that it talks about, you know, values and traditions and lots of other things. What we have seen recently, P5 arranged a peace accord between Iran and US. And US unilaterally, you know, got out of it. Then US unilaterally said, we are not going to support your initiative on environment. So what we having, you know, on, for instance, you know, coming back to your question about RSS and BJP and, you know, VHP and the Sangh Parivar, other parties. What we see is that they have been committing genocide on their will and without any sort of intervention from the Indian government. Indian police has been, you know, supporting them. So my question is, why Pakistan government, it has so many, you know, evidences, why we don't ban the RSS? We should take the lead and then we should take it to the UN and ask them to, you know, tag it as a terrorist organization. What India has been doing with Pakistan. So they, you know, our mainstream political parties, they have tagged them as terrorists. If we see in India, even RSS was itself banned inside India till 1980s. So what changed?
Gandhi's
US,
killing.
Yes.
So this was a person who belonged to RSS,
Yeah.
and he killed Gandhi.
Yeah, and then openly they talk about Nazis. They say that their model, is a Nazi model. So
Even the swastika.
yeah, so why then US, UK, they had all tagged it as a terrorist organization, but things changed in 2000, early 2000. Then things started to reverse when Modi came to the
CM.
Yes.
CM of Gujarat.
Yeah.
Moving on to our next topic, sir. Today, the Pakistan Hindu Council is giving a sit-in Islamabad. Tomorrow, they would be outside the Indian High Commission in Islamabad. That is to demand the killing of, interrogation into the killing of 11 members of Hindu community from Pakistan who moved to India, and under mysterious circumstances they were found dead. India isn't safe for anybody, I would say, not even for Hindus at the moment, as you were discussing that earlier. How do you see this sit-in, and how important is this sit-in for the Hindu community anywhere in the world and for the Pakistani community?
Taimur, if we look at this issue, Indian atrocity, their crimes, there is a big list. This is another addition to those heinous crimes which they have already committed. Addition to those, it has two main dimensions. First, India is not safe for even for the Hindus, you very rightly mentioned. They are not going to afford those who are migrating. They have made CAA, getting the people from, say, Hindus from Pakistan, Bangladesh or elsewhere to get them settled, but they are not accepting it, number one. Number two, the Hindus which went to India for having a dream of for prosperity, that has been exposed India, because they didn't get the job, they didn't get the basic amenities of life. So that they have exposed India that economically it is a myth. Had it been, then people should have not gone through those sufferings,
Right.
number one. Number two, coming to this second point, the sit-in. I think this is a legitimate and the right protest which the Hindu brethren and community which is they are doing in Pakistan. They are basically going to highlight the issue at regional and international fora as well. The reason is, once these Hindus are killed, then there should be some inquiry, there should be some commission, and Pakistan must be given access to India to investigate that in what circumstances their nationals were killed, though they were Hindu, no matter, but for us they are our people.
Our people, absolutely. We have a member of National Assembly, Mr. Dr. Ramesh Kumar Vankwani. He's a MNA from Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf and chairperson of Pakistan Hindu Council. Welcome to the show, sir.
Thank you, sir. Finally, we have achieved the 70% target, and now we are sitting outside the Indian consulate, and we have entered in the diplomatic enclave, and we are waiting there because we want to give our resolution, our demands to Indian envoy by hand, and we are sitting here, and we will sit there till they will not give us the response, because it is our demands, and I have selected some people to enter the diplomatic enclave, and more people are sitting outside. If they will not give the answer, I will call all other people to enter the diplomatic enclave and go inside. So it is my clear message through your channel that we want to give our demand and we want the justice.
Right. And Dr. Vankwani, what are the basic demands and what do you expect at the moment? Tomorrow that you are going to give in the sit-in in front of the Indian High Commission. What are the basic demands?
Because the people, 11 people who have murdered, all are Pakistani and have the Pakistani passport. They are not the Indian. They are living in India only on the long-term visa, but they have the Indian Pakistani passport. So it is the international treaty. You must give the permission you must give the access to the Pakistan embassy to meet with the people surrounding and the family members. And we also want the future of other Hindu community who are living there on long-term visa, what are their condition, and about the Kashmir. We need justice with the Kashmir people. We need the justice with we need the fair investigation about the Samjhauta Express. We need the Hinduism policy. Don't want that India should follow the policy of RSS and extremist policy, because our Hinduism religion is teaching us the peace, harmony and interfaith.
Right. Dr. Bangwani, thank you for joining us. Thank you for your time. Gentlemen, thank you for joining us. Dr. Sir, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. Dr. Kausar, pleasure having you on the show. Mr. Ibrahim, thank you for your time. Thank you for joining us. That's all from today's dialogue. See you next time. Khuda Hafiz.